Alright, hello. So today we're going to talk about variables. Now, as you recall from our last video, we talked about data types, and if you didn't watch that video, I suggest you go and take a look at it because it will help you understand what variables are. Now, what is a variable? A variable is actually a container or a box, in the meaning that it actually stores something, that something being an information or a value. Now, in C++, we have more than just one type of variable. We have int variables, float variables, double variables, etc., all dependent on the data types. Also, it's called a variable because its value can vary. It can be changed or modified later on. Alright, now that we have established what a variable is and what it can do, we want to know how do we create a variable. Now, the process of creating a variable is actually called declaration. When we declare a variable, we essentially tell the computer that we want to create a variable. The variables that we declare are stored in the computer's RAM. Now, if you don't know what RAM is, it actually stands for random access memory. Alright, now that we know what a variable is and what a declaration means, we want to know how do we access the variable that we want to declare or create. The stored variables each have a unique address by which the computer identifies them. You're probably wondering, well, alright, the computer identifies a variable by its address, but how do we, the programmers, identify it? The answer is that each variable has also a unique name attached to it. That name is used by us when we code something. Now, the name of a variable actually has a couple of rules. The first rule is that the name consists of letters, so capital letters, small letters, digits, so from 0 to 9, and or the underscore character. Also, the first character of the name will be either a letter or the underscore character. And the last and probably the most important rule is that variable names are case sensitive. Now we have two examples of variable names right at the bottom of the screen. We can see that the first example, the one on the left, uses both capital letters, small letters, digits, and the underscore character, and therefore is a valid variable name. The second example, the one on the right, also does the same thing. Now these two names are actually different names. You can see that the only difference between these two names is that the first example starts with the capital V while the second starts with the small v. Therefore, these two names are different because variable names are case sensitive. Alright, we know what a variable is. We know what the creation of a variable means. We know that the computer accesses the variable using an address. We don't really care what the address is. We only care what the variable name is because the variable name is the identifier that we're gonna use while we code. And we know what data types are. Therefore, we know how to declare our variable. So the process of declaring a variable is actually pretty simple. We just have to use this simple formula. So first we're going to write the data type of our variable. So if we want to store a number, for example, in our variable, we're going to say, instead of data type, we're going to say int, which stands for integer. Then we write our variable name. This is totally up to us. As long as we respect those three rules, the variable name will be a valid one. And last but not least, we have to put a semicolon at the end of this instruction. Now, if we want to declare multiple variables in just one line, we can separate the variable names by using the comma character. Alright, now that we have settled the theoretical part of variables, let us try to do a practical application. So therefore, we're going to use a compiler. For this example, I'm going to use the CodeBlocks compiler, and I will not show you how to download this compiler. There are plenty of tutorials on YouTube. So instead, I'm going to show you how to open an application and how to start to program your first line of code. Alright, so at first you're going to have this start screen. The first thing you're going to want to do is to create a new project. You're going to create a console application. Say next. You want to select C++ because we're going to program in C++. Next. And here is where you name your project title. For this example, I'm going to name mine YouTube. Then you want to find a path for your folder because your project is going to be a folder. For this example, I'm going to just save it on desktop. Alright, pretty much everything is set up now. just say next. Don't try to understand what's going on here because even I don't really know what's happening right here, so just say finish. And then let me explain a little bit about the layout. So on the left side you're going to have your folders, your projects, your files, everything you're working on. So for this example we're going to open our main file. So for that we have this project that I just created, and we have all of our files set up in folders. So my first folder will be the sources folder. I open the sources folder and I find my first file, which is the main file. I double click on that and all of a sudden I see code appearing. The last part is the bottom part where you will find compiling errors. So for example, if you write something wrong, the compiler will send you a message to notify you, hey, you misspelled something or you forgot to do something. Now don't worry if you don't really understand what's going on here. The first 3 lines aren't that important, we're going to cover them on later videos. The same thing is for the last 2 lines. The 7th line just tells the computer to print the message hello world. Now how do we run this program? We have 2 options. First is called build. Build actually just verifies if you have spelling mistakes, if you have syntax errors. If you don't know what syntax errors are, basically if you let's say misspell a keyword in programming, so for example int, instead of int you type it, that will be considered as a syntax error. Or if you forget a semicolon. For the record, in C++ every or almost every line of code is finished by a semicolon. It's the computer's way to understand basic punctuation. Code is actually like a poem. You write lines, but you also have to organize those lines. You need separators, those being the semicolons. Now, I don't want you to get scared of everything you're seeing here. First thing I want to do is just do this. I want you to see clearly what we're doing right here. So, all you're going to care about is the code that we write in between these 2 accolades. Alright, so let's just delete this. And we said we want to apply everything that we have learned so far. So let's say we want to create a variable that stores a number. So we have actually 3 options. We can either declare that variable as being an int variable, and you see that the int shortcut pops right out, or we can declare it as a float data type, or even a double data type. Now let's say we just want a simple number, an integer number. So as we said, the first thing to declare a variable is to specify its data type. So for instance, here we want an integer, so we're just going to type int. The second step is to write the name of the variable. Now we have a couple of rules. I'll show you a couple of examples to see what is considered a valid variable name and what is considered a wrong variable name. So for instance, underscore variable underscore name is actually a valid variable name, and I will just show you how you can test this. So the last step is to just write a semicolon, and we use the build function in this compiler to see if it gives us an error message. So we just press build and we do wait until the message pops right out, and we'll see that we have no errors, but we only have 1 warning, and I'll explain this warning. Is basically this code right here doesn't really do anything. We declared the variable, but we still didn't use it. So the compiler just tells us, hey, you're wasting space. You just declared the variable and you're not using it. Alright, let's try another example. So for instance, if I write 1, 2, 3, 4 variable name, I want this to be our variable name. Now if we build this program, we will see that we'll get an error. You see, we have an error. Why? Because as I said in the rules, a variable name starts either with a letter or with an underscore character. So let's try one more example. Let's say variable, and this time 1, 2, 3, 4. We build this program and you will see that we're not going to get any errors, only a warning because we just declared a variable and we're not using it. Let's say we want a boolean variable, so we use bool. For the record, every single data type is written in small letters. Instead, the variable names can actually be written in capital letters. So I will name this variable as being true underscore or underscore false, and why not 1, 2, 3. This is also a valid variable name. We compile this, we'll get no errors, just 4 warnings, because again we declared 4 variables and we're not using them. So 0 errors, 4 warnings. Now if I somehow forget a semicolon and I compile this, I'll get an error because the program doesn't understand where this line of code ends. As I said before, if we have multiple variables, we can actually declare them using the comma symbol. But there is a problem here. The problem is that we can only declare multiple variables in one line if they share the same data type. So for example, I will not be able to declare in a single line an int variable and then a float variable. Instead, I can declare 2 or more int variables. So for example, if I just move this, just put a comma and move this right here, real number will not be a real number, will not be a float number. It will be instead an integer, an int number, alright? And of course I can declare as many variables as I want. So I can declare A, B, C, D, all of these first of all are valid variable names and are all integer names. E, F, G are floating data types, so they can store a real number. Alright, now before we end this video, I want to give you a perspective about how variables are stored in the computer's memory. So as I said before, variables are stored in the random access memory of the computer. Now imagine that when we declare a variable, we actually create a box. This box is actually inside the RAM, and it has a unique address, which will be like a 0101 thing that the computer actually understands. This is how the computer actually sees this box. This box also has a name. So let's say we're going to write name. Alright, this is how we see it, how we, the programmers, actually identify this box and not mistake it for another box. And lastly, this box has a value, alright? This is what's inside this box. And of course, when we want to assign another value, or let's say just delete the first value, we just erase the first value and give another value. So it's just as easy as such. Alright, that is all for today. Thanks a lot for watching and stay tuned to our next video where we're going to talk about how we can take the user's input and assign values to variables. Have a nice day.